let us cast our minds back to a terrifying point of our history, the year 1939. Tensions in Europe had been bubbling for some time, and many were already correctly stating that the outbreak of war was inevitable. Germany, led by the notorious Adolf Hitler, had repeatedly broken the terms of the Versailles Treaty throughout the 1930s and had been building and developing his armies ready for war. Pertinently for Britain, on the 1st of September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. This was to be the catalyst for the outbreak of World War II. It would not be long before the true horrors of war were to hit home. For only 2 days later, on the 3rd of September 1939, the first British ship would be attacked and sunk. This ship, however, was not laden with soldiers, but rather with civilians. The sinking of the SS Athenia was an incident which would be shrouded in mystery and conspiracies for several years to come. My name is Alex. Welcome to Curiosity Matters, Episode 2, The Sinking of the SS Athenia. On the evening of the 1st of September 1939, the SS Athenia, a steam-powered passenger line, set off from Glasgow, Scotland, on its way to Montreal in Canada. Those on board were mainly civilians. Many were refugees trying to escape the incoming terror of war. The boat was busier than usual. Men, women, and children of all ages formed the ship's 1,100 civilian passengers. The crew, which numbered approximately 300, were commanded by Captain James Cook. After stops via Liverpool and Belfast to pick up the final passengers, the SS Athenia began its voyage across the Atlantic Ocean on the 3rd of September 1939. As I mentioned at the beginning of this film, it had only been a couple of days since the then UK Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain had declared war on Nazi Germany. Safe in the knowledge, however, that as a civilian passenger transport ship they should be safe from enemy attack, and therefore the SS Athenia carried on as normal, unaware of the danger that they were sailing into. It is at this point in the journey, not long after leaving Ireland, that we come to our first point of contention. It has been reported that the SS Athenia, as soon as she got out into the Atlantic, began zigzagging its way through the water. It was also alleged that she blacked out her windows, covering portholes, other sources of light to prevent her from being seen. Now, these were tactics used by military vessels to try and avoid U-boats, and some reports go as far as saying that the SS Athenia had actually been advised to undertake such manoeuvres by the government given the wartime tensions. This may have therefore made her appear to be some sort of military vessel rather than a civilian vessel, especially as she was also not following conventional shipping routes either. It is a curious thing, perhaps, that later, during subsequent inquiries, that the captain, when asked why his route was unconventional and that he was not following the usual shipping route, he replied that he would not be divulging such information. It is recorded that he said that he had been under strict, secret naval instructions. As with much of the information surrounding the Athenia, the details I have read remain unclear and contradictory. Years later, eyewitnesses would say, for example, that the Athenia did not undertake any of the manoeuvres that I've just detailed. This is supported by contemporary sources such as Yale University Press, which say that there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever to support that the Athenia acted in such a way that I just described. And they've in fact suggested that this was all a lie, conducted by the enemy to try and legitimize their actions during the international outcry, which later unfolded. This said, however, the Royal Navy website today states that the ship did indeed commit to a zigzag and blacking out manoeuvre. So ultimately, you've got to go and do your own research and make whatever you wish out of this information. Whatever the truth is, there is no dispute that the Athenia soon garnered the attention of a German U-boat commanded by Oberleutnant Fritz Julius Lemp, who has been described as a young and aggressive German commander. It was therefore that just after 1600 hours on the 3rd of September, the German U-boat, which had been cruising on the surface of the water, first spotted the Athenia. It immediately submerged and began stalking its unsuspecting prey. By this point, the Athenia had only travelled 200 miles. 3 hours then passed. It was just after 7:30 when Captain James Cook began to sit down with some of his guests for dinner. Up until this point, he had been absent in the dinner hall, preferring to remain on the bridge due to the developing wartime situation. He had, however, allegedly remarked to another passenger that day that they should now be safe, given the distance they had travelled from Britain. As the captain's guests began to ease and relax into their evening, Oberleutnant Lemp gave the order. 2 torpedoes were fired. The first misfired, the second struck the Athenia's engine room. The impact was immediate. Immobilized and beginning to take on water, the Athenia had already incurred casualties, some fatally, due to this initial blast. Devastatingly, this included a Canadian girl, 10 years old, who unfortunately died 6 days later in hospital after being struck in the head by some shrapnel caused by the torpedo. Can you imagine being plunged into darkness? Screams echoing around you, the twisted metal, the noise of the water cascading, filling into the boat. It is hard to imagine what those on board the Athenia experienced in those initial seconds. A passenger liner attacked. The last thing that anybody on board would have been expecting. Feats of heroism were immediately on display, however, from both passengers and from crew alike. It is reported that many swam through the debris and the wreckage to help those that had been trapped. Others, using only matches, attempted to light the way for themselves and other passengers towards the lifeboats, which, after some initial difficulties, were successfully launched. Unfortunately, however, later, due to the panic and disorientation, further casualties were incurred due to the poor handling of the lifeboats, with several unfortunately colliding with the propellers of rescue boats and others capsized due to overloading, as in those sort of initial minutes people were clambering and scraping to get on top of scraping to get into these lifeboats, even though tragically there were plenty of lifeboats available. Now, distress signals were quickly sent, and fortunately there were a number of international vessels which came to the aid of the crew and to the passengers. It would take 14 hours for the Athenia to sink, and it is reported, as one might expect, that the captain stayed with his ship until everybody else was evacuated. Approximately 120 people were killed, most due to the initial explosion caused by the torpedo. Any loss of life is devastating, especially in these circumstances, and perhaps highlights that war takes no prisoners, and that lives young and old are taken indiscriminately. The crew and subsequent rescue vessels would be later commended for their professionalism and the swift response to the attack. This ultimately prevented further loss of life, though I imagine probably provided them with little comfort in the circumstances. It is, however, an example of the bravery and stoicism that would be demonstrated by many, many others time and time again. The German U-boat commander, Lemp, realised in minutes the grave error he had made due to radio messages which were being intercepted by other members of his crew. The U-boat, however, rather than assist the survivors as it was compelled to do in such circumstances, simply disappeared into the black abyss of the sea as rescue efforts mounted around them. It would, in fact, take Lemp 23 days to report the error, to put it lightly, to his commanders, by which time rumours had already begun to swell. Understandably, in the immediate aftermath of the incident, due to the lack of communication from Lemp, the German Admiralty denied any accusation that a German U-boat had been involved in the situation, for as far as they were concerned, there were no German U-boats in the area. However, once German High Command, including Joseph Goebbels and Hitler, were informed of the incident, they decided to keep it a secret, to the point where Lemp's wartime diary was in fact altered to hide the truth. New narratives were painted with accusations that the British had attacked their own vessel in an attempt to turn neutral countries against Germany. Some believed, in fact, that the act was so stupid and clumsy that it was implausible that the Germans would have done such a thing. And this was quite a common view in America at the time. It would in fact take several years for the truth to be revealed, as it was not until the Nuremberg trials in 1946 that the German command would accept any responsibility and began to divulge the actions that they had taken to hide the truth. By this time, Lemp had been killed in action, and therefore he never faced justice for his part in the atrocity. Like many, I have a personal interest in the SS Athenia, given my relationship to the captain, in fact, Captain James Cook. He was my grandfather's uncle, and I am very proud of this fact and am currently the custodian of some of his personal effects, including this walking cane and this rather nice timepiece. I have no idea whether they were on his person during the time of the attack. I doubt it, but a fantastic bit of family history, as I'm sure you can appreciate. My grandfather still recounts tales of watching his uncle, when the uncle was retired later in life, sitting on his armchair, looking out into the ocean, commenting on all the ships passing by. Usually, apparently, pointing out all the things they were doing wrong, normally speeding. But yes, now there is another story that my grandfather recounts that I want to tell you about, because I think it's quite pertinent, really. So the story goes that in 1958, a book was released. It was called A Night of Terror, written by Max Caulfield. The book was sort of half fiction, half non-fiction story about the night that the SS Athenia was attacked. My grandfather, however, remembers his uncle being absolutely furious about the book, not because of the content, but because of its front cover. If you see in the initial prints, the front cover shows a man and a woman lying on some sort of debris in the ocean in front of a ship's propeller. It sort of looks like that scene in Titanic had DiCaprio's character managed to climb on the door or whatever it is next to Kate Winslet's character at the end of the film. But on the front cover of this book, the woman is wearing this sort of red dress and exposing a lot of leg, and the man is lying beside her, sort of like open, sort of white shirt, sort of revealing his chest. And ultimately, they're drawn to make them look quite rugged and tussled, but in like sort of a conventionally sort of attractive way. It's a cover which is meant to be sort of exciting, sexy, promiscuous, especially by the standards of the 1950s. And it does look like the pair are on a sort of exciting adventure. They do not look like they have just been torpedoed and are likely suffering the worst night of their life. Now, Captain Cook, my grandfather's uncle, was enraged by this cover. He thought that the incident was being trivialised and romanticised, and it was in poor taste by the artist. And he thought, and I think quite fairly, that the way that the cover had been drawn, that it was quite demeaning and showed a lack of respect to everyone involved. Like many people who were caught up in the horrors of war, my grandfather said that he never really spoke about the incident and what he actually had to endure. I think it's important to remember that this was not an exciting adventure for those involved, and it shouldn't be considered a sort of captivating wartime tale. This is a catastrophic incident where many innocent people lost their lives during a time when they thought they were escaping to safety. And I'm certain from what my grandfather says that Captain James Cook and many others carried a large weight on their shoulders for the rest of their life, given what they had endured that day. Now, if you would like to find out more about the SS Athenia, I have linked all my sources in the description below for you to have a little read of if you're interested. And I'm also aware that there's an American film company that have made a documentary about this incident called Athenea's Last Voyage. At time of recording this, it's not available sort of in general distribution. I think they're sort of touring all the film festivals at the minute, but I will make sure that I leave a link to their website in the description as well, just in case you want to follow it up and have a watch of it, hopefully when it comes out. Now, I appreciate this has been a heavy episode, but if you may, I'd like to leave you with a final thought. It is perhaps easy and probably necessary for some to make heroes out of war. There is no doubt in my mind that those people on the Athenia that night and in the subsequent war which followed, they demonstrated the qualities which we associate with being a hero. We must bear in mind, however, that the costs of war can never ever be underestimated. I'm sure that many of our heroes were thrown into situations they likely wouldn't have wanted to have faced otherwise and would have avoided if they had the choice. War is, after all, a machine fueled by death. I hope in some way that this little film of mine serves as a stark reminder of the horrors that war brings, and that we should strive to avoid them, whether that be on a global scale or much closer to home. I always think it's curious, considering the fact that, those men that tend to make the decisions in war are rarely the ones that get their own boots muddy. Anyway, as I said, that was quite a heavy episode. Thank you for watching it. I hope you did find it interesting. It's a bit of history that not many people know about, even though, as I said, it was the first boat sunk during World War II, and I do think it makes for some fascinating research. So I hope you go off and do some research of your own. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for tuning in to the second episode of Curiosity Matters, and I shall see you next time. Goodbye.